Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making time this afternoon to decode budget 2024 with a specific focus on family offices. We should be getting Rishab Mariwala from Sharrp Ventures to join us very soon. But in the meantime, Jay, thank you for joining us. Jay Rupani, as many of you would know, runs Aeka Connect and also represents the Dinesh Hinduja family office. Nisha, thank you for joining us, representing the Narotam Sekhsaria family office. Deepak, an old friend and a veteran in this field, representing one of the largest family offices, Catamaran. Nirali, thank you for joining us, representing the Chona family office. And Apurva, you're a prolific investor, entrepreneur, family office, all in one. So thank you. And my very own partner, Hemanth, and colleague Akash, thank you for joining us. If I may, I'll just start with a few opening comments, take the liberty of doing that as a moderator. And, to me, I think maybe this is becoming a trend of late, that the economic survey tends to be a little more encouraging and promising than the actual budget speech. Perhaps for obvious reasons, a budget speech is set in parliament, so that needs to cater to a different audience, whereas the economic survey kind of perhaps speaks more of the truth. Both the good and the not so good. In terms of the growth rate, it's of course a little lower than what RBI had projected, but I think if it's talking about 6.5 to 7, in my opinion, we should be afraid of falling below 7, because for the kind of goals that we've set ourselves, both on the size of the economy and the fiscal discipline, any growth less than 7 will be worrisome. The big takeaway again for me, a little bit from the survey and from the speech, was on the manufacturing side. Again, a data point that some of you may have caught. India is now the fifth largest manufacturing economy in the world, surpassing South Korea. And I think the fact that they've reduced the duty rates on phones shows a very high level of confidence that now there's enough local manufacturing, there's a huge amount of exports happening, and therefore even if sort of imports were to temporarily go up or even permanently go up because of lower duty rates, it's not going to upset the manufacturing apple cart. So I think from that perspective, a big one in my view. A little bit from the family office perspective, I don't know if both the economic survey and or the budget speech and of course some of the proposals do enough to really unshackle investment and entrepreneurship. Would love to get your individual perspectives. And on ease of doing business, obviously there's a lot of lip service and a lot of the acronyms and populism around it, but at least as advisors on a day-to-day basis, we just think that it's becoming harder and harder to do business in India. And while I just want to bring up this point that we're celebrating the removal of angel tax, we don't realize that it is the same government who introduced angel tax, and then we're now celebrating reassessments being brought down from 10 years to 5 years without remembering that it's the same government that introduced a 10-year window. So, I think we also need to start recognizing that we need to perhaps be a little more critical of harsh measures a little ahead of time, and not maybe celebrate their removal as much as maybe we are celebrating. And the last point from my side, many of the changes, particularly on capital gains and share buyback, and I know we'll talk about it in detail, clearly seem to be done in a very, very hurried way right now. It's a different view that people can have on the direction of the change, but just the manner in which the change has been made, it opens up more loopholes, planning opportunities, unintended consequences. And having had so much time, at least the people at the bureaucracy who had a lot of time this year to write up a budget, I'm quite surprised how come they've left so much unattended to. And I wonder if this will be one of those rollback years where a lot of the changes will get rolled back between now and the passage. But with that, and Rishab, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'll probably just open it up to everyone in no particular order. Maybe Rishab, you can start first, just your opening remarks on the budget.
Yes, thanks, Abhishek. So apologies, I got slightly delayed. I think in terms of there are quite a few new opportunities that arise from the budget allocations. I think the increase in agriculture and the rural economy that could encourage purchase of FMCG products and durables. And I think the tax incentives for eco-friendly products as well may drive the demand for sustainable consumer goods, aligning with some of these global environmental goals. Also, I believe that on account of the direct government impetus in some of these areas, the technologies serving the agricultural economy, and those focused on renewable energy, they might spawn some new investment opportunities.
Thanks, Rishab. Jay, if you could just give us your opening thoughts on the budget.
Sure. So I'm still grappling with it, right? So yesterday when the news came out and we were all out, a lot of us were sort of listening to it later in the night and sort of catching up this morning as I got into Bombay. And I realized that first I thought it was, sort of just another budget. And then as you peel the onion, I realized that I think there's every item from a asset allocation perspective has an impact. And some of it is good, some of it not so good. Since we own a lot of real estate, I think for me, we are in the midst of a couple of transactions. And so obviously that has a very clear impact with the indexation going away post 2001. And I think that's not going to be nice for us. But the overall, I think keeping aside, for me, keeping aside all the good stuff in terms of infrastructure spend and the deficit coming down by 1%, all those are great things. But the reality is, we're a family office. You want to look at your investments, you want to look at your hits, and I know we'll jump into some of that a bit later. But I think the jury's still out from my end. I feel I need to deep dive a little more. Depending on our asset allocation, it may not be as good as we expected.
Got it. Jeff, if I can just stay with you and go a little deeper, this whole point on how shifts in tax policies affect multi-generational wealth creation and strategies, right? And how do families better prepare and insulate? And, clearly the capital gains change in this budget is one of those examples where it's completely changed the status quo. It's not just rate revision, taking away indexation, etc. So, did you sort of think that the changes would be so dramatic and drastic? And, how do families really deal with the outcomes when it comes to preserving wealth, forget accretion?
No, I think a very good question, Abhishek. I think I went through all the asset classes this morning and just sort of soaked it in, right? So let's just take step by step, right? So obviously the long-term tax rates going from 10 to 12.5, honestly, that doesn't affect us as much. Of course, nobody wants to pay more, but the truth is when the US is paying 20%, the world pays much more. I mean, we're going to get some parity. I mean, if India's got to grow, it's got to fill up its tax coffers. I get that, right? My expectation was 10 going to 20. So I'm kind of happy it's 12.5. So, and also if you look at a family office portfolio, we are long-term investors, right? Ideally, my 90% of my portfolio doesn't churn. So I'm okay with paying whatever I have to pay whenever I exit, maybe 5 years down, 10 years down. The challenge here is the short-term piece, because there's always a tactical portfolio, and that's now going to get hit by 5%, additional short-term gains, right? The FNO piece also has a small STT impact. We're still working through that impact in terms of actual numbers. But the big one for me is actually the real estate piece, right? And so to take away indexation, and then so 2001 becoming base year, and now you've got a whole new way to calculate your capital gains, unless you're doing a regular house purchase and sale where you can use 54F and sort of move the bucket down the road, there's no impact. But if you're doing a large land transaction, which we are sort of in the midst of selling, right, it's going to have an impact. And the office today is actually really furiously working with our advisors to figure out, what is the actual number that's going to have an impact. And then, of course, we got to soak that in. So I feel some of this is bound to happen. I believe the lesson here is that if you're compounding from a long term, and as long as you're not exiting assets, you're okay, right? Of course, the end result, you're going to pay tax, and you can't run away from that, and nobody wants to either. It's fair for the government to get its share. And I think the folks have always, today already people are, in terms of succession, as you said, insulating it for the future. Today, there are still pockets in India where you can gift assets in advance. You don't have to wait for someone to will it to you, you can actually gift it today and without any cost in Karnataka. So I think there are elements to it. Today for me, these are the ones that we're grappling with, and I think the one which I think a lot of our friends on the call are happy about is on the private side, and I'll let someone else pick that up.
Sure, Jay. No, thank you. Nisha, if I can bring you in, please, your sort of opening thoughts on the budget, and then I have a specific question for you as well.
Yeah, surely. So I think the peculiarity of what we do at family offices is that we are not into a particular business or like anybody in an operating business would be, or we are not into a particular strategy in terms of what a particular fund would do. We could well be in startups, we could well be doing listed on a particular sector. So the peculiarity of what we do at family offices is that, like, literally everything that happens in the economy or the budget does impact us. To each one of us, it may have specific differences, but if not immediately, directionally, everything that happens in the budget does impact us, and that's like a peculiarity of what we do as a business. I like to call us as a business, and there's a reason for it, which I will touch upon as we go along. My while what's done on the tax rates, to me, while I take your point, Abhishek, that it seems to be done in a hurried manner, but this is like a trend that I've seen with this government over a period of time. Is they take a decision, they decide to announce it, and if there are corrections or nuances to be corrected or smoothened over a period of time, they then think it over, but they come up with their decisions. So I'm not surprised if there are things which need to be corrected or smoothened over a period of time. My take to the changes when it comes to tax rates, or when it comes to the fact that they did not extend the concession or the concessional rate of 15% that was available to new manufacturing businesses, because that was really like an incentive also, in addition to everything else that they were doing, that they were providing a concessional rate of tax that did expire in March 24, and they did not extend it. So to my mind, and that just did not also create a lot of noise or stir, or at least that's how I saw it. To my mind, the fact that they took a decision to come up with the rate of or capital gains tax changes, or not extending the manufacturing rate of tax, to me, it shows confidence. It shows confidence in the India story, and maybe that's based them to take a decision that this is not going to break it. So this is my visual lens to it. There will be nuances certainly, but this is how I look at it. I think the way it is also messaging that structurally we are strong, and now we are at that stage in our journey as a country that we do not have to think about making such decisions. So this is my aspect to it. What I was also hoping to see, which is again a macro point, that when it came to fixed deposits and the way they are taxed and the impact that it is having on banking, I was hoping, or I was having an eye to see, is there anything in the budget that they're doing about it, and that's something that I didn't see. So that's again an important thing. Having a robust banking is an important part of everything that we do to the economy, and that's again like a big factor. I don't think it was rocket science to really bring about corrections there. So not having done that is again an aspect that I'm wondering about. Just my last comment is, I do not like, one thing that I personally do not like is that some aspects or changes when they come up, and I don't recall which specific provision, I did read it in a hurried manner, but if I'm not wrong, in one capital gains tax provision, they did mention that, this particular provision does, incentivize, or it gives a lot of benefit to HNIs, and therefore let's do away with it. I think HNIs really are, doing their bit on the kind of tax rates that they're paying in the country, and to kind of call them out like this is not something that I liked, and this is how I think about it.
No, very insightful. Thank you, Nisha. And if I can just stay with you and request a quick comment on Gift City. There's been a lot of chatter on whether that's really a workable framework for families to get capital outside, the family office, family investment fund structure. There was no mention of that, but there were a few other incentives announced. So do you think as a family office, there's enough confidence now on Gift having become mainstream, or there are still some hesitations and fully going into that structure?
So, I think, the one thing that I would like to bring about is that, if people are not aware on this call, is that as things stand today, is that while the gift regulator has specific clear provisions which say that uh, a bunch of family members coming together wanting to invest overseas is something we are going to permit. There's a specific path route identified on it, but the RBI doesn't seem to be in agreement and alignment on that, and that's like a deadlock as we speak today. I think, to my mind, while there's one part which is clearly written in the provision, and then there is a discussion, and that's like a larger thing to talk about, that things are announced and then there is a discussion, which is like a macro trend. But the way I think about it is that while that's where things stand, it's a larger decision, and it's a directional decision that the government is considering, to my mind. I do not have actual on-ground insights, but it's a structural decision that do we want to allow capital in this country to be invested in other jurisdictions. And while HNIs and family offices are the ones who have asked for it, for an allocation overseas, but if we see the kind of domestic capital that is supporting the markets currently, if there's a question asked that why just family offices? I mean, if anybody as an individual also then wants to have an allocation, why not? And I think that's where it's a larger tactical call, which is where it is stuck, and not really the actual dichotomy on ground.
Got it. Oh, very helpful, and maybe we'll come back on Gift and ask a few others. Deepak, if I can request you to just share your thoughts, and then I have a specific question for you.
No, thanks, Abhishek. Thanks for having me on. And look, I think, I think Jay said, when you saw the headlines, things looked great. Especially, I wanted to call out on the fiscal consolidation. That a good part of the RBI dividend actually went into, into that. And again, on the positives, I think a lot of statements about the MSME, and I think Rishab also mentioned about agri. We were a little more focused on MSME because in the last 1 year, Catamaran has put a pretty large focus both on public and private into the manufacturing and MSME side. And while the headlines are good there, I think we're a little disappointed that there was not much detail, especially around skilling, which is a big problem for many manufacturing guys. While there's some statements made, but not sure how that money is going to trickle down and actually make a difference. And then I think Nisha said what I wanted to say, which is also sorely missing was anything for the banking sector, which has really done well in the last few years, but there was not much in the budget for them. And then on the positive side, I think on the private side, because many family offices do invest in private side, I think that long-term gains coming down there is obviously a good sign. Especially in, I think, there are lots of funds today sitting on, deals that they've done many years ago, and this could be hopefully some nudge to start to get some exits there. But yeah, broadly, I think this is what I would say. Of course, there wasn't also anything that was pushing private capex, which is a sore point today, right? It's starting to tick up, but not going at the rate at which everybody wants. I didn't see much there as well. So mixed bag, I would say, Abhishek.
No, thanks, Deepak. And maybe if I can ask for a trade secret, given what the budget has brought out, what would your sort of recommendations be for optimizing portfolios in the post-budget world?
No, see, I think, I was just thinking through this morning on the Catamaran allocation itself, and it's kind of status quo for us. Time will tell, but we had made certain bets last year on the public side, I think most family offices are going in long, so there's not going to be much difference there as long as you stay to that strategy. On the private side, I think the certainly a little bit more risk taking will happen because exits will become better. But there are other issues on the private side that beyond the budget that have to be taken care of there. I think the lack of anything on the fixed deposit side will push some to rethink fixed income strategies. I think we ourselves have been looking at other avenues like private credit and so on. So that's the other one. From a sector-wise themes, I think see the places we've been playing. One, of course, manufacturing, but the other is export-oriented companies, right? There's a little bit of hesitation in touching anything that the government is touching, right? So export-oriented, purely private, where you don't mess around. I think those are still a favorite for us. So let's see. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. Nirali, if I can request you to come in with your opening thoughts, please.
Thank you, Abhishek. Hi, everyone. For me, honestly, I think this was a budget where somewhere internally our teams were expecting that a lot of things will happen on the direct taxation part of it. But I did not anticipate it will happen to this extent. And like Jay rightly said, right, they've covered all asset classes. In a way, it is great that they are trying to get the common taxation, and because yes, there were uh, kind of like if you go to see, equity had the most conservative taxation versus in the last year budget they made fixed income as the most aggressive taxation. So I think they're trying to meet somewhere in the middle, which is great. But a couple of things that I mean worked for me in this budget was the government is absolutely clear when it comes to growth, and they're trying to achieve that by increasing capex, increasing I mean employment. I think somewhere I read that this is the budget where the finance minister mentioned the word employment 33 times. And I think this was the maximum frequency that, in any of a speech that, the word employment has been said. And somewhere it just gives that there is renewed emphasis on job creation. Of course, there were a couple of things that was missing from a PLI scheme, and government divestment in terms of increasing government's revenues. It also sort of, somewhere shows that, the biggest way for the government now to get revenues is through taxation. And family offices like ours need to now find structures on how do we kind of guardrail ourselves. Of course, there is no escaping tax. I do not say that one needs to escape tax, but can we create certain structures which could become beneficial going forward? I mean, the one thing that we are discussing within our teams was also, and which is I think is very, very imperative. Maybe we can talk about this later during our chat, but is that how important it is now for family offices to create trust structures. Because the way I see it, they have taxed everything possible, right? The only thing that we've still not been taxed is on estate duty, and which is where multi-generational wealth transfer will happen. And now we're talking about serious amount of wealth, right? So I think that is one very key important point that I would like to leave with the panel, that trust structures is something that one needs to absolutely look at. What also worked for me, and why it's a personal bias also, is she did speak a little bit about space tech, which is what the government is looking to kind of give impetus. We are investors in this company called Agnicool. So I was pretty excited about that. Apart from that, I mean, we can okay, two other things. Custom duties, yes, great in certain aspects where they've increased custom duties for plastic, etc. All of that to kind of discourage use of it. What I'm actually more scared about is not the direct taxation, but indirect taxation (GST), which will come out in the next 6 months. I don't know what's going to happen there, but yeah, it's a wait and watch situation right now.
No, thank you, Nirali. And I was sort of going to ask you about the need for a formal structure around family offices. And I think you very articulately mentioned that I think that need has arisen. And at least in my personal view, while trusts insulate against inheritance tax, and we'll talk about it, I don't know if that's the only solution. I think we perhaps need a wider debate on what structures work for family offices. Apurva, if I can bring you in for your opening remarks, and also, as someone who's been doing and continues to do and has seen a lot of philanthropic elements surrounding family offices, there were a bunch of changes on that. Would love to get your opening remarks and specific comments on the philanthropy related amendments.
Sure. Thanks so much, Abhishek. Thanks for having me here. The good thing about going towards the end is that my fellow panelists have covered a fair bit of the budget, but I'll just kind of take a few points which I thought were interesting. One is, there was a certain sense of continuity in terms of spend on infra. And I think, while it's something we're almost beginning to take for granted from the budget, I think that's a positive thing in itself, right? The fact that we are expecting a continuous infra spend. And I think from a long-term perspective, that's, something I believe will kind of keep on giving dividends. I'm happy to see continuity on that front. The kind of emphasis on employment was kind of course, expected, but also, good to see how it will really unfold, and especially the skilling side, which is alongside that. A lot of that detail, I think is missing, and I hope that we are able to translate some of this policy intent into actual on-ground work. Around infra, again, from an urban development perspective, which was an area of interest, obviously from our business point of view, I think there was a lot of interesting commentary around how they are looking at the top 14 cities and plans around it. Unfortunately, not much detail has been shared. Similarly, transit-oriented development was a theme which was spoken about, which I think is something interesting if we can really translate it into policy, and I hope we'll see some of that. Housing LTCG, while Jay spoke about the other side of it, honestly, from a broader perspective, if I were to move out of the family office scenario and look at, our end consumers, the larger, broader end consumer, which we as real estate developers deal with, I think, there is a certain sense of comfort in the fact that you can move houses, or you can, sell assets at a lower rate of incidence, especially given that large part of these buyers have only been able to buy their houses in the last decade or a little beyond that. So, in those cases, the 2001 piece doesn't kind of come into play as much. So it's a mixed bag, I guess, on the, real estate piece. And of course, I think one thing, as a family office, we are, probably over-indexed on the private side, and definitely welcome the lowering of LTCG on that side. Quickly taking up your question on the philanthropic side, Abhishek, I'll just kind of preempt that, or kind of caveat that by saying, the way we look at, our philanthropic endeavors is essentially to say that, we've, by virtue of the businesses that we run and, the success, whatever little success that we've been able to get there, we have an opportunity to create an impact in some certain fields, of our choosing, whether it's education, whether it's urban revival, whether it's health, etc. And what we really want or seek from the government in this side is a transparent and clear regulatory mechanism, and B, a flexible tax regime which allows you, for example, to carry forward gains over multiple years, to put in long-term projects like could be schools, hospitals, etc. And the couple of things which have happened in this budget is, I think there is an attempt to simplify the regulatory and tax structure, in terms of merging the two existing income tax benefit, or the two income tax options which are there today. I think the government, with CSR kind of having been extended and specifically being pointed at from an internship perspective, I think that's an interesting kind of window which opens up. It's something which we don't have enough details about at this point of time, but I think broadly, if I were to say, there is an attempt to simplify, clarify, both on the statutory and the taxation side, some of which we are seeing in this budget, some of which I think we are continuing to ask the government of. And I think the broadening of under, usage, just like we've seen internship in this case, I think is something which we will further look forward to. There are further opportunities which we hope will come in budgets of the future.
No, very well put, Apurva. Thank you so much. Hemanth, I know you've been waiting. Just wanted to get your thoughts, and also a specific question. I know Nirali touched on it, but on this whole inheritance tax, there was no mention of it at all in the speech and nothing in the bill as well. So does it mean the dust is settled, or is this the calm before the storm?
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Abhishek. So I think one particular thing that really caught my attention is again on employment creation, because I think the government really recognizes the fact that we are going to have a larger and larger workforce year on year, because it is with some surveys it is expected that India is going to peak out on its population by 2070, which means we are almost 40 to 50 years away. And with more and more workforce, I think government is taking the right steps in terms of the national education policy, uh, right, to skill people right from the root level, right, creation of employment, all of this. But I hope that this is not just going to remain as a lip service, and a lot of effort on ground also is required, because incentives on one hand, and implementation on the other, that's probably one of the crucial things that I would expect, right? That's one key takeaway. One good thing overall in the budget, if we really look at from a tax perspective, is removal of angel tax. And the reason why I play emphasis on this is, and specifically, basis our experience of a lot of transactions over last 2 years, a lot of investment into companies are also coming from India, a large chunk of it, and not providing relief to Indian investors from angel tax or investments from angel tax was quite a deterrent. And especially in the SaaS sector, SaaS and tech sector, where there was a lot of motivation to be a overseas holdco and India sub kind of structures, have seen a lot of challenges in terms of capital raise, etc., or utilization of funds which had limitations from India. So that's a great relief, I would say. Uh, Coming to the specific question on estate duty, like while Nirali mentioned, right, you can never predict what the government is going to do. But at least on this one, I feel the government may not do anything during this particular term, because, in the last several years, we've been hearing just before budget, estate duty is very likely to come. But in terms of this time's budget, I think this was also a big political debate that happened around it. So government, I would believe, is going to be very cautious around introducing this, and may not take a very aggressive stance without consultation.
Thanks, Hemanth. And would love to get everyone's views at some point on this. Rishab, I know you have a time constraint. If I can just bring you back in. At Sharp Ventures, you all have kind of pioneered a corporate venture arm of sorts. And I think I find it a very unique proposition, because while at one level it's sort of very tied in to the larger business you'll run, but on the other side, it's a completely independent family office structure. Just wondering, why are some of the larger corporates not really taking the bold bets that you've taken in creating Sharp Ventures and creating those sort of synergies?
Sure, sure. No, thanks, Abhishek. So just clarifying a couple of things. One is what Sharp does. So Sharp as an entity is different from Marico. So, we have our own decision making is independent of what they do. So as long as there's no conflict in the larger entity, as long as there's no conflict, so we take an approval from the CFO and the CEO. If you're doing a deal in the unlisted space, we'll take their okay, as long as there's no conflict, then we'll go ahead and invest on with our own capital, and it's our own decision making, our own IC, everything is our process and our team and our capital. So Marico separately itself runs its own sort of and corporate venture it's not a corporate venture arm really, because Unilever Ventures would have a corporate venture arm where their whole intent is to invest and be investors and not operators. In Marico's case, we want to be operators. So we will acquire a small amount of small quantum of that business. We'll get some equity stake in that, and then it'll be almost like a creeping acquisition. So which is not like a corporate venture arm, right? Because and that for Marico that's worked out well, because we've had two or three successes, and I would say that they've pioneered this whole sort of perspective of how consumer firms actually go and take a small business, and then they, over a period of time, they acquire it to it's like a path to majority. So we've done four sort of investments which are WIP. So two actually are fully owned by us today, and where the founder was involved initially, and then over a period of time, there's a certain top line and certain bottom line that the founders have to sort of guardrails around the deal, and then we will sort of acquire it fully. So the two are where the founders are still working on, where Marico is a 50 or 51% shareholder, and the other two are 100% owned by Marico. So that's one part. I think, I mean, to your question, Abhishek, where where corporate venture firms, why have they not actually done well, is because I think the objectives have been quite different. I think as an operating entity, risk taking with capital, because again, these are all listed players, right? It impacts your whatever your ROE or ROCE gets impacted, because these are high risk ventures. So the potential to actually lose money is very high. So the public market sees it very differently, and I don't know how the public market will view certain investments. The firm obviously gets a lot of innovation and gets a lot of ideas from these early stage sort of bets, but yeah, you they don't the it sort of almost becomes like difficult to to move over to the other side, where the support that they get from the mothership or from the parent company, they won't do distribution for them, they won't support them, they might give them ideas, but I think that marriage of entrepreneur and the corporate is actually difficult to create, because corporates like to have majority share. They like to be able to take entire decisions in investments. You're one of the investors, you're not the only investor. So if you're the only investor, I think that's great, because that gives them access to then almost like create the narrative. But other than that, I think it just gets like very difficult for corporate venture arms from a risk aversion, ROI uncertainty. I think even cultural differences. The way a founder runs a business is very different from where the corporate runs a business. So these are, I mean, nuances which are actually pretty large, but and often get missed on, right? Strategic misalignment, cultural differences, or the corporate also wants to focus on organic growth through internal innovation and development, rather than saying, like, let the founder decide what he or she wants to do with the org, and that ownership is limited or less. So I think those are a few of the reasons why these CVC arms have actually failed. um, and someone like Marico, where again, it's not a CVC, it's an acquisition sort of perspective. And that's why it's worked out for us, frankly.
No, thank you, Rishab. I think you articulated very well. And Jay, I think just wanted to bring you in here, given the wide breadth of members you have. What are you hearing from your members on CVCs? Do you largely agree with the way Rishab articulated that there are reasons why it won't work in the Indian context, perhaps?
Yeah, so I think from a family office perspective, what we have seen over the last, I would say, 2 decades is, families have realized one thing: let me play in the domain that I'm known for. So if you have core domain expertise, whether it's FMCG, real estate, IT, if I do private transactions within those domains, I'm better served at making the best returns. There are obviously folks that have done the spray and pray 70, 80, 90, sort of investments, and that's more the VC game, and that may be run by a dedicated family member. But the truth is, I think that's where I think folks have realized that let me play my core strength, let me go deep, let me put bigger checks, let me build that portfolio up, and so that's work from a family of, and that's what we're seeing within Aeka as well. Is families have really chosen to stay in their backyard, and they get respected and they get the best terms. I mean, people come to them because they know they'll open doors. And similar to what Rishab said, is I think there's a different DNA, and I think what he's done at Sharp is commendable, is to sort of really go into it. Of course, there is the parent mothership that oversees stuff, but it's an independent family office. They are making their bets, and there's a different strategy there. I think corporate venture arms, let's face it, it's complicated, right? The minute you say corporate, there's hierarchy, there's reporting, there is and here you have a startup entrepreneur who wants to run, at whatever 1,000 kilometers an hour. He wants an answer tomorrow on his funding needs. It's a different DNA. I think that's the struggle. And I have friends who've done this in the US, who've been part of CVCs and have stepped out because they just realized that the DNA is so different between what a corporate needs and what a venture arm needs that it's very hard to map it. And it has to come from the top. So unless the CEO of the corporate arm sees value in that, and it's such a small fish, right? It's less than what, 0.005% of that market cap. He says, why are we spending so much time on building these babies? Let's just monitor and just acquire them when they're ready, right? So I think it comes from the top. And if the CEO shifts, if it was his baby and he shifts, I've seen a friend of mine in the Valley who literally said that entire CVC arm shut because the next guy came and said, you guys are wasting my time. Like, I don't want to talk about startups.
No.
Let's build new verticals, right? So I think that's got a lot more time to go through.
No, very helpful. Deepak, if I can bring you in, maybe first quickly your thoughts. I know you've been on the corporate side. If you have a perspective.
Yeah. I was going to say, Abhishek, that I was running the corporate venture arm at Infosys some time ago. But the capital is not so important for both parties in that transaction. It's more for either, like Rishab was saying, a creeping M&A or access to some innovation. And I think today, when you look at the private side in India, they're still largely execution-based, entities. They're not that much innovation-based entities. And so you can, if they're execution-based, and like Jay is saying, at some point of time, if you really believe you can pick up a new market because you acquire this, just go ahead and acquire it. Why do you need to be invested in it from the beginning and face all the hassles of valuation and so on? But I think as we see cohorts now of more innovation-led startups come in, then we have to see how CVC reacts to that. Even at Infosys, most of the venture bets that we took were all outside in the Bay Area or Israel and things like that, where there's an established innovation ecosystem. So hopefully this will change a little bit more when then local incumbent companies will want to access innovation, and that is why they will put money behind the CVC. It's outsourced R&D in some sense.
Got it. Apurva, this comes in well with the question I wanted to ask you. You've actually recently announced a pioneering venture on the retail side, and just continuing this discussion around corporate venture and what kind of bold moves are family offices willing to take. So one is the asset allocation, investing in private public debt and so on. But do you think there's enough appetite for family offices to take bold moves and incubate new businesses? Because in general, at least the sense we have is that any new entrepreneur, new founder always needs to look internationally for money. But is that story changing where they can now come to you and say, you've created this great retail venture and here's the next idea from me?
Sure. Thanks so much, Abhishek. So just for context, we announced this venture called Broadway, which is experiential retail around D2C brands in partnership with Vivek Biani and Anna Rock and a couple of others. So Abhishek, to set the context from a broader or from my own perspective, and then maybe from a family office perspective, I've from a D2C or even pre-D2C, I've had a journey of investing on the consumer side now for the last 10, 12 years. And which is where, kind of this seemed to, when this opportunity kind of came, it seemed like a logical next step because there was a certain kind of view and understanding of the consumer brand ecosystem and the retail kind of ecosystem in the new age sense. And, the family office piece itself, which we kind of speak about, is a fairly young ecosystem in our country, right? And even in our own case, while the family has been making investments for a while, it's only in the last less than a decade that we've really started organizing ourselves as, an investment arm or a family office. And I think there is an evolution which we've gone through, and I'm sure all our peers also have, where you kind of start with some kind of usual vanilla investing in public markets, funds, moving on to a slightly broader private side. I think, and then kind of taking bolder kind of bets, incubating businesses, and looking at areas of interest either from the corporate side or from the family interest side. And I think that journey is kind of beginning to unfold. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of this as we kind of move along. And of course, we're not the only ones. So there are other examples, plenty of them around us. And I'm sure we'll see a lot more interesting kind of business ideas starting to come out of family offices in the next few years.
Great, and Nirali, I think great time to bring you in. I know your family office has also incubated a large number of brands and businesses. Just your perspective on this whole debate of incubating a business versus just being an investor.
Well, the funny thing is that we just incubated a business 9 months back. It's called Hoppo Ice Cream. But this is again from the founders of Have More Ice Cream. And for us, it's not technically incubating a business. It's just, I think it's in the family's DNA to run F&B businesses. But otherwise, there are two sets of broadly people, one who can be operators and one who are just investors, right? And I think what we've been able to achieve a mix of both. For us, operating a business comes very, very naturally. We didn't go out, look for opportunities, build market analysis, etc., so on and so forth. We worked in our circle of competence, be it when it comes to managing a business or managing a family office or operating a business. So I think that is one of the key things that people need to consider. I mean, understand what your circle of competence is, and try to swim within that, because otherwise it's a hard world out there, right? And that is where most entrepreneurs, listed businesses, you see, they get penalized is only because of wrong capital allocation. And yeah, I mean, it's funny that how from being investors to now being investees, raising from large private equity, we've seen the whole journey. And from a business perspective, we are only getting started. It's the second innings for the Chona family, but very, very exciting times ahead. Yeah, so that's a little bit on me. I mean, we can dig deeper if you have any other questions related to that.
Sure, no, thanks, Nirali. Thanks for that candid explanation. Nisha, I'm going to come to you, and Deepak will pull you in as well on this one. Just in terms of, the AIFs in India, there's sort of a flurry of first-time fund managers. We have a lot of people leaving the more established managers, setting up their own funds. And I think there's two angles to it. One is, this famous narrative that fund managers make money for themselves and not for their investors, and also then a little bit of the lack of clarity from a tax and regulatory perspective. So, Nisha, just wanted your perspective that how do you all look at AIFs in general from a family office perspective, and Deepak then would love to get yours as well.
So I think Abhishek, is your question in terms of are we happy with the kind of information that we get from managers, or
Yeah, I think more just your perspective on, how do you think the AIF sector is sort of for the alternate asset class, asset management sector in India has matured? Do you find it a viable investment alternative, and what's holding it back if so, if it's not?
Yeah, so personally, I mean, as a family office, our philosophy is that we like to invest in areas that we understand, and we like to develop expertise in-house. But yeah, where we think that there is expertise from the outside that is needed, we work with managers. In terms of this is a personal view, I personally find myself distant in terms of information that I would like to get on the underlying portfolio when it comes to what AIFs provide. Obviously, the managers will have a different lens. I think they find compliance painful, but I feel the kind of information that I would expect to get. I know you get a valuation, you get a markup, but basis of that, how has it come about? You're sometimes distant. You do your own digging, you know, from market knowledge. But as a person that is interested with a part of your capital, I would like more information on what's gone in underlying.
Thanks. So Deepak, your perspectives on just the AIF as a sector and your personal views.
No, AIFs as it relates to private investments, I think the jury's still out in India. And Jay and I were just talking about it yesterday at another forum. But because of the lack of returns that have come in, and like Nisha was saying, there's a uneasy sense of whether they're carrying the right valuations. So one thing potentially on the regulatory side, which I think would be useful to look at is there some standardization of valuation or transparency in what the funds put out there for their LPs. Today, you get two funds or invest in the same company but are carrying it at different valuations, and how are you as an LP going to digest that? So as a family office, we are very conservative. We actually have our own so-called liquidity value of all these investments, which is deeply marked down, so that anything that you get back is a bonus really, and you're not really counting on it. So I think there's still some ways to go on getting full comfort about the asset class. I joke that we are trying to do in 5-6 years what the US took like 2 decades to do before that industry is stabilized, at least on the VC side of things, right? And then I think, just linking it back to the budget in some sense, Abhishek, I still have to explore what this VCC thing is in detail, but that was the only other one that came up, which will, I think as it is, there's quite a few funds that have started in India over the last 3-4 years, but there's now more avenues to bring money in. And hopefully, they will do a good job of those investments.
No, I think
Abhishek, I'd like to chip in a little bit over here
Yeah.
and just, extending this conversation. I think what the budget did is clearly in my mind, there are AIFs for private investments and there are AIFs for listed public market investments as well, right? I think that for managers who are managing listed public market AIFs and PMS, I think they're going to have a run for their money because mutual fund now makes so much more sense from a
Yeah.
taxation perspective. Because today, what happens today, an AIF or a PMS buys and
Correct.
sells shares. Every time I have to pay tax. Whereas when a mutual fund buys and sells shares, I don't have to pay any tax. I only have to pay tax when I buy and sell
Correct.
my mutual fund. So I
Correct.
think the tax arbitrage over here is going to be massive. And somewhere family offices, although we call ourselves really sophisticated investors, etc., so on and so forth, but I think mutual funds is going to have a I think family offices will have to look at mutual funds as a serious option. Fund managers who only have PMS and an AIF platform will have to look at exploring mutual fund as a platform as well, because I really foresee a lot of fund flow going from PMS AIFs to mutual funds now. I mean, from a post-tax basis, the PMS managers who's generating 3-4% alpha on a post-tax basis, all of that is gone.
a very important perspective, Nirali. Thanks for bringing that up. Just coming back to the VCC point, Deepak. Yes, I think it was mentioned in the speech, but nothing beyond that. Hopefully that will then allow some of the fund managers to create single product, fund, single investor funds. So, today what a lot of players in the market are doing in a sort of clandestine, beat the system. Hopefully that becomes a little more open. So I think that'll be a great move. Yeah. Hemanth, just coming back to you with again a very pointed question: can we still trust in trusts in terms of creating wealth?
So my answer would be, Abhishek, it was never, I mean, while estate duty is one of the angles, right, to be considered for making a decision whether you want to create a trust. But I think it was not a single decision or the only factor, right, to create a trust. Uh, the other angles are, protecting the wealth, likely from any litigation, right, and more importantly, how inheritance of wealth can happen more smoothly, considering the amount of litigation, even in some high-profile cases that all of us have seen, right. So to that extent, as compared to a will, the flexibility and the opportunity that a trust provides, right? I would strongly believe that the answer, that trust you can create or you can believe in trust, is a yes.
Yeah, and I think we were all shocked when there was that one amendment around the ability to make gifts, right? And thankfully, they haven't withdrawn that amendment when it comes to individuals and HUFs making gifts. They've only withdrawn it for corporates. It's another debate as to whether that's a valid amendment, and were corporates anyway permitted to make gifts, and can a corporate have love and affection and all those good things. But thankfully, there's no change in terms of individuals moving assets to a trust. So in that sense, I think that also establishes that the government recognizes that more and more individuals will move assets into a trust structure. Akash, I want to bring you in for a very important discussion on crypto and virtual digital assets. Again, the speech was silent, no changes, thankfully. Just your perspective, and would love others to chime in terms of allocations and changes required. So, do you think the dust is settled now? Do we need some clarity on taxation of BDAs?
Yeah. So, Abhishek, prior to this budget, there were three key expectations of the crypto industry. So, firstly, it was reduction in TDS rate from 1% to 0.01%. Secondly, not taxing the gains at a flat rate of 30%, and also allowing set-off of losses. Thirdly, more from creating a regulatory framework for the crypto assets. But as you mentioned, in this budget, absolutely no expectations were met. No change, favorable or unfavorable, were carried out in this budget. So it will be very interesting to see how the stakeholders of the crypto industry will take this, given the regulatory and tax challenges they are facing. Because the other way of looking at it is, if there is no change in the policy, it means stability. So it could result in basically gradual adoption of the crypto assets.
Great. Anyone else has a perspective on BDAs and crypto? Yeah. Okay.
Except that we are long cryptos.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Nirali.
I don't know what will
Well,
happen
we're
to crypto in the light of the gold import duty coming down. That's the only other thing to look at, maybe, as alternate hedge of currency. Yeah.
absolutely. And we had Gaurav, the founder of Bluestone, yesterday on a different panel, and I think he was saying that it's a great move. It will spur
Yeah,
consumption.
Titan was up about 7%. So I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
all their losses of last 1 month was recouped yesterday.
Right. Awesome. So yeah, so we are sort of on the hour. I just wanted to sort of go one by one. Thank you for joining us, and maybe just sort of quick 2 words, starting with you, Jay. Thank you for joining us. 2 words on the budget.
So before I jump to 2 words, I think there were two positives that I forgot to mention earlier, which I think are good for us. One is the tax rate on FOFs, fund of funds, because that's an untapped, that was limited because the tax rate went to slab rates, that entire industry cratered. And so investing abroad will come back thanks to FOFs, and it helps folks who are limited by their LRS limits to actually build out portfolios for their kids. That was very good. And second was the lower taxation on REITs in line with equities. I think that's also helpful, because that's the adoption that you need from the market to jump into that. So like I said at the start, for me it's still a mixed bag. We are still checking out what the damage is across all the different asset classes we hold. But that's the nature of life. It's unpredictable, and you got to sort of move ahead.
Great. Nisha, thank you for joining, and your sort of 2 words on the budget.
I think the core to what we do as business is the India story. And to me, while there will be parts we do not like, but to me, the confidence and courage re-emphasizes on the India story. And that's what I take away from this.
Great. Deepak, thank you for joining us, and your sort of parting 2 words.
No, I think there were a lot of very positive directional statements in the budget, just like what Nisha said, and but the devil in the details. So hopefully we can get down to some very practical execution, not the tax side. It's about part A and really of some of those initiatives. So looking forward to that and supporting it from a family office perspective.
Great. Nirali, thank you for joining. I wish your camera was working, but your sort of 2 thoughts.
Well, I mean, the one thing I forgot to mention is I really missed Sita Raman's very popular South Indian quotes. This time around, there were none to be heard. But jokes apart, I think the numbers speak for themselves. Accelerated deficit reduction, jobs creation, and tax rationalization. I think if we are able to do this in a meticulous way, I mean, India has to grow.
Great. Thanks. Apurva, thanks for joining. Can't wait to see how Broadway comes up, but your sort of quick two thoughts.
So overall, feeling positive, Abhishek. There's a certain sense of continuity, quality of expenditure is good, and I think these have become standard, which is a great thing to have. One thing which I'll just point out is, I think there has been a little bit of a paradigm shift in terms of the way we look at LTCG. And one of the key things which, as investors, one looks at is a continuity in terms of taxation thought and policy thought. So I hope that, while of course rates can move up a little bit or down a little bit as kind of things move on, I hope that the paradigm doesn't change going forward, and there is a continuity of thought on that.
Lovely. No, I think I totally echo that, Apurva. Thanks for bringing that up. Hemanth, if you can summarize the budget in 2 words, and with that we can sort of wind up our panel.
Abhishek, the government not doing a lot of populist things and focusing more on development and infrastructure is my key takeaway.
Super. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you for making the time in the middle of the day. I think this was a very valuable discussion. Look forward to more chats and interaction as we unravel all the changes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Abhishek.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
bye. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.